My teacher declined to lock down during an actual school shooting. Even blocked the light switch while gunshots came closer. What if the person sworn to protect you actually put your life in danger? What if they chose their ego over your very survival? Because a year ago, when I begged my teacher to let us hide from a shooter, she told me, "Sit down, or you're expelled." And last week, they finally took her away in handcuffs. It all started so mundanely. I was in Miss Brown's AP history class, just like any other Tuesday. Then, that chilling announcement crackled over the PA, "Lockdown. Lockdown. This is not a drill." We'd rehearsed this 100 times since kindergarten. Lights off. Hide in the corner. Stay quiet. Simple. Everyone instinctively started moving. But Miss Brown stepped in front of us, that familiar glint in her eye, the one she gets when someone dares question her authority. "Get back to your desks now," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. I raised my hand, almost on autopilot. "But Miss Brown, we're supposed to." She cut me off. "The only procedures you follow are mine. Sit down or you're all getting zeros on your presentations." Then came the speech. You know the one. The "I've been teaching for 25 years" monologue about respect and how her generation didn't need constant hand-holding. Here's the thing about Ms. Brown. She was one of those teachers who was obsessively strict about the weirdest stuff, but completely checked out when it came to actual teaching. She'd mark you absent for being 30 seconds late, but then hand out A's on essays she clearly hadn't even skimmed. I once turned in a paper with a whole paragraph about SpongeBob in the middle, just to test her. Got a 98. So, most of us, reluctantly, sat back down. Nobody wanted to risk their GPA over what was probably just another false alarm. But then, the announcement repeated. Code red. This is a code red. All staff and students follow lockdown procedures immediately. That never happens in drills. They always say it once and that's it. My stomach plummeted, twisting into a knot. It was that sickening feeling you get before a huge test you didn't study for, only 1,000 times worse. I kept glancing at the door. The hallway lights were still blaring, bright and unforgiving. In drills, teachers turn off their lights instantly. Then I heard it. A series of pops, like firecrackers, but wrong. Not right at all. Suddenly, everyone's phone buzzed at once. I pulled mine out discreetly, under my desk. My boyfriend, Tyler, was in chemistry 2 holes over. His text made my blood run cold, hiding in supply closet. Someone has a gun. Where are you? More texts flooded in, behind filing cabinet in main office, under Mr. Garcia's desk. I showed Miss Brown my phone. My boyfriend says there's someone with a... She scoffed, crossing her arms. I see what's happening here. You think you can stage some elaborate prank to get me in trouble? Get me fired? The popping sounds were getting louder. Closer. Then, a scream. Not a playful scream. A raw, guttural, terrified scream. That's probably drama class practicing, Ms. Brown said, but even her voice wavered. I looked across the hall, into Mr. Peterson's classroom. Lights off. No movement. Just a terrifying darkness where 20 kids should have been. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. Henderson won't let us hide. Still at desks. Tyler's reply was immediate. What? Get to safety now. Sweet Ben, who never argued with anyone, tried next. Ms. Brown, please. This feels real. Feelings aren't facts, Ben. Sit down. More running. Lots of feet, all going the same direction. Away from something. Or someone. The PA crackled again, then cut off mid-word. That's when we heard the shots. Not pops anymore. Bang, bang, bang. Like someone slamming a metal door. But sharper. Louder. Real. I stood up. We need to hide now. Sit down or you're expelled. Ms. Brown moved to block the light switch. I will not lose my job because you children want to play games. Something inside me just snapped. I don't care. I sprinted for the lights. That's when chaos erupted. Half the class rushed to the safe corner. The other half froze, torn between a lifetime of following rules and the primal scream inside their heads. Danger! Ms. Brown grabbed at my arm, but I yanked away. She was screaming about disrespect, about consequences. You're all being hysterical. This paranoia is exactly what social media has done to you. Manufactured fear. But we weren't listening. Desks scraped across the linoleum as we barricaded the door. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying. The frozen kids finally scrambled over, cramming into our corner. 23 teenagers, trying to become invisible. Everyone except Ms. Brown. She stood at her desk, arms crossed, fury radiating off her. The doorknob rattled. Everyone stopped breathing. It turned. Locked. Thank God. It was locked. A shadow passed under the door. Paused. We could hear breathing on the other side. Or maybe that was just my heart pounding so hard in my ears. Footsteps. Moving on. Those were the longest 10 seconds of my entire life. The SWAT team found us 40 minutes later. Ms. Brown was still babbling about how we'd overreacted to a simple drill. A week later, we finally understood why she was so adamant. Because that's when they told us who the shooter was. Jake Wilson, from my sophomore English class. The quiet kid who sat in the back corner, drawing anime. I sat on the gurney outside, my body shaking like I had hypothermia, even though it was May. A paramedic wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, asking if I could breathe. But all I could think about was Jake walking past our door. Jake with a gun. Jake, who I'd lent a pencil to just last week. Detective Santos showed up, badge and notebook in hand. Crouching down to my eye level, she asked me to walk through everything that happened in Ms. Brown's room. I told her about the announcement, about Ms. Brown making us stay at our desks, about the sounds getting closer. She wrote it all down, nodding when I mentioned turning off the lights myself. The parking lot was pure chaos. Parents everywhere, news vans setting up, ambulances wailing. Mom crashed through the police tape, still in her hospital scrubs, mascara streaking her face. She grabbed me so hard I couldn't breathe, touching my face, my arms, checking for injuries that weren't there, demanding answers from the detective about how a teacher could keep kids exposed. Tyler's mom was there too, hugging him over and over while he just stood there, blank. Detective Santos pulled me aside, showing me screenshots of my texts to Tyler about Ms. Brown not letting us hide. She said 23 students had given the exact same story, that Ms. Brown kept insisting it was fake, even after the gunshots started. 2 kids died in the math hallway, she told me, her voice low. 3 more at the hospital, all from rooms that followed protocol immediately, except for one girl grazed by a bullet that went through a door. Dad showed up, taking over from Mom, leading me to his truck without a word. The radio stayed off the whole drive home. We both jumped when a motorcycle roared past us at a red light. Our house felt wrong. Too normal with its regular smell of coffee and laundry detergent. Dad made spaghetti, but I just pushed it around my plate. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages, everyone asking, why didn't Miss Brown let us hide? That night, I couldn't sleep. Just replayed those 40 minutes over and over. The next morning, an automated call from the district said school was cancelled indefinitely. Mom called in sick to stay home with me, but I locked my bedroom door, sitting on my bed, thinking about how we almost didn't barricade, how we almost stayed at our desks like Ms. Brown wanted. Channel 8 had our school on every commercial break. Then Ms. Brown's face filled the screen. She was standing in her driveway, telling the reporter she maintained control during chaos and her students were alive because she didn't panic. Mom grabbed the remote and threw it so hard it cracked the TV screen. Tyler sent me a link to someone's cell phone video from Mr. Peterson's dark classroom, everyone hidden and silent. Ms. Brown's voice carried through the walls. Manufactured fear. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m., exactly when she was blocking our light switch. The video had 50,000 views in 2 hours. The comments were brutal. I spent the next day jumping at every creak, every slammed car door. Mom brought soup I didn't touch, The group chat buzzed with talk of lawyers and lawsuits. But I couldn't focus. Principal Foster called that evening, his voice carefully neutral, saying the district needed my written statement separate from the police. Mom snatched the phone, telling him I'd provide it through our attorney. News to me, since I didn't know we were getting one. The next morning, Ben's mom drove him over. He needed to talk to someone who was there. We sat on my front porch, and he kept starting sentences he couldn't finish, about almost staying in his seat, about what would have happened if I hadn't turned off those lights. His hands shook just like mine. Tyler's parents dropped him off later, and we went straight to the backyard, to the picnic table under the big oak tree. He rolled up his jeans, showing me the dark purple bruises covering his knees from wedging himself behind chemical shelves. His voice was flat as he told me how the shots kept getting closer, how he knew I was 2 holes away and couldn't do anything. We sat there for an hour, not really talking about it, but not talking about anything else either, his fingers picking at the splintered wood. Day 5. Mom spent the morning on the phone. By noon, she'd found Rebecca Thompson, a lawyer specializing in school safety cases. Her office walls were covered in newspaper clippings, headlines about negligence lawsuits, safety violations. Rebecca looked at Mom's notes. What Ms. Brown did went beyond poor judgment. Keeping students exposed during an active shooter situation is criminal endangerment. There was something unsettling, she said, about Ms. Brown insisting it was all fake, even with gunshots echoing. What makes a teacher so convinced actual danger isn't real when every other classroom is dark and hidden? She explained about civil suits, but criminal charges were up to the DA. The community meeting on day 6 exploded into chaos the second Ms. Brown walked in with her union rep. Parents started screaming. She just stood there, the same controlled expression she'd had during the shooting, repeating that she'd followed her professional judgment. Someone threw a water bottle that hit the wall behind her. Security guards had to form a circle to get her out. The detective called that same night. Her question made my whole body go cold. Had Ms. Brown ever mentioned Jake Wilson in class? He'd been her student 3 years ago. Jake Wilson. The name everyone knew through whispers, but the news wouldn't say yet. Day 7, morning. I finally made myself shower and change out of the clothes I'd been wearing for days. Dad stood at the stove, making pancakes like any other Sunday, but we both jumped when the doorbell rang. Just the delivery guy. That split second of panic was our new normal. That evening, the news finally confirmed what everyone already knew, showing Jake's yearbook photo. The anchor dropped the real bomb. Wilson had filed a formal complaint against teacher Patricia Brown 3 years ago for psychological abuse. Mom grabbed her phone, calling our lawyer. Dad hunted through online records. We found a school board meeting transcript from 2021 mentioning a sealed student complaint against staff, dates matching perfectly. Ms. Brown's name wasn't listed, but we knew. Day 8. Tyler picked me up. We drove to the empty mall parking lot, engine off. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. He finally said, she knew. She had to know it might be him, and she still kept us all exposed. Ben texted our class group chat with info his parents found. 3 other students from Jake's graduating class remembered Ms. Brown having it out for him. A girl named Melissa said Ms. Brown failed Jake on a technicality that almost cost him graduation. The stories painted a clear pattern, targeting certain students. Day 9. The detective showed up at our house with a court order for Ms. Brown's personnel file. She told Mom they'd found something. Jake wasn't the only complaint. There were 6 others, all sealed, all resolved without action. She needed my detailed statement about Ms. Brown's exact words. Every single thing she'd said while we begged her to let us hide. I sat at our kitchen table, the blank form in front of me, my pen hovering. The first line asked for a description of events. I wrote 3 words before crossing them out. Started again. Cross that out too. How do you put into words the way someone's voice changes when they've been in charge so long they can't imagine being wrong? The detective waited patiently as I tried 6 different ways to explain how Ms. Brown stood there, blocking the light switch, while we heard those shots getting closer. I finally just wrote exactly what she said and did. Step by step. No opinions. Just facts. Day 10. My phone buzzed with a news alert at breakfast. The school board had placed Ms. Brown on administrative leave. Good, I thought, until I read the teachers' union statement underneath, calling it a rush to judgment against a dedicated educator with 25 years of service. The comment section was already at 300 posts, half calling her a hero, half calling for her arrest. Mom slammed my laptop shut, but I'd already seen my name mentioned 14 times. That afternoon, Principal Foster showed up at our door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He sat on our couch, staring at his hands, telling Mom about the complaints over the years. Parents saying Ms. Brown was too rigid, too harsh, but she had tenure, and how students got good test scores, so nothing ever happened. His voice cracked when he mentioned the 2 kids who didn't make it out. Day 11 started with my phone exploding at 6 a.m. Someone had leaked Jake's manifesto. 3 whole pages about Ms. Brown. How she failed him on his senior thesis over a missing footnote. How that 1 grade kept him out of his dream college. How she laughed when he asked for a chance to fix it. The details made my skin crawl. Dates, times, conversations he'd secretly recorded, building his case for why she deserved what was coming. Our lawyer, Rebecca, called an emergency meeting. All 23 families from Ms. Brown's classroom crammed into a Holiday Inn conference room. She dropped the bomb. The school district knew about Jake's fixation on Ms. Brown because his therapist had sent a warning 2 months before the shooting. The room erupted. Parents shouting, crying, demanding answers. Rebecca tried to explain mandatory reporting laws and liability. Day 12. I woke up to 47 Instagram notifications. Ms. Brown had gone on some podcast called Truth in Education, painting herself as the victim of woke culture and teenage hysteria. She actually used my full name, called me a troubled student with attendance issues, twisted my grandmother's funeral into me skipping class for fun. The host kept agreeing, kids today are soft, can't handle structure, need safe spaces instead of real education. Rebecca filed a cease and desist within 2 hours, but the episode already had 12,000 downloads. My Instagram filled with strangers calling me a liar, an attention seeker, a crisis actor. Someone found Mom's work number and started calling the nurse's station, asking if she was proud of raising a daughter who destroys teachers' lives. It's day 13. Tyler came over with his sleeping bag, sitting up on my bedroom floor. Neither of us could handle being alone anymore. We lay there in the dark at 3 a.m., both wide awake, staring at nothing. He kept going over that day. How he could have pulled the fire alarm from chemistry. How that would have evacuated everyone before Jake even started. The what ifs were eating us both alive. There was nothing to say that would make it better. Ms. Brown's husband, who sold real estate all over town, started a GoFundMe for her legal defense the next morning. It hit $30,000 in 6 hours. The description called it a witch hunt against a dedicated teacher, included photos of her at graduations with former students who became doctors and lawyers, carefully leaving out anyone who didn't fit the narrative. People from 3 states away were donating, leaving comments about liberals destroying education. Day 14. Ben's mom called, her voice shaking. They were pulling out of the legal action. Ben's dad's construction company had just lost 3 major contracts with no explanation. She kept saying they couldn't prove it was connected, but everyone knew Ms. Brown's brother-in-law ran the biggest development firm in town and golfed with half the city council. Daniel Harris from my grade found me at the coffee shop that afternoon, his phone already out, shaking in his hand. He'd been hiding in the main office, pressed behind the secretary's desk where he could see the security monitor. He'd recorded the whole thing on his phone without even thinking. The video was grainy, but clear enough. Ms. Brown walking down the hallway 30 seconds after the first shots. Not running, not ducking, just walking like it was any other day between classes, while Mr. Peterson's door was already barricaded, and Mrs. Garcia had her kids hiding under desks. Daniel forwarded it to Detective Santos right there, his fingers moving so fast they kept missing buttons. Day 15. I went back to therapy for the first time since middle school, when my parents got divorced. Dr. Patel's office had the same fake plants, beige walls, and that white noise machine that was supposed to be calming but just made me think of static. I told her about the shadow under the door, how I still heard Ms. Brown saying we were hysterical while people were dying down the hall. She wrote notes on her yellow pad, asking me to describe what I felt in my body when I remembered it. Daniel's video hit Twitter before dinner. By midnight, #BrownU was trending with 40,000 retweets. People slowed it down, zoomed in. You could see her checking her phone while other teachers were dragging kids into classrooms. The timestamp was clear as day after the shooting started. News vans showed up at Daniel's house. His parents had to take him to his aunt in Boston. Day 16. Detective Santos called me in to look at the footage with a specialist from the state. She pointed at the screen. No startle response when the shots went off. No surprise on Ms. Brown's face. Just this calm decision to keep walking. They were building a case for willful endangerment. Up to 5 years in prison. Mom picked me up and drove straight to the district office, filling out paperwork to pull me out for homeschooling. Ms. Brown walking calmly down the hall while other teachers barricaded doors is the kind of detail that makes lawyers rub their hands together and insurance companies reach for their checkbooks, she said. She took 3 weeks of vacation time, told me she didn't care about my college applications. She cared about me being alive. We both ended up crying in the kitchen while the pasta boiled over. Day 17. Ms. Brown's lawyer held a big press conference on the courthouse steps. 3 of her former students stood behind him in suits. One was a state senator now, talking about rushing to judgment and promising to investigate the investigation. The lawyer claimed the video was doctored, demanded independent analysis. Tyler's parents didn't wait. They transferred him to St. Mary's private school that day. His mom said they couldn't wait for the system to sort this out. He texted me constantly, feeling guilty about leaving, even though I kept telling him to go. Our phones became this lifeline, both of us waking up at 3 a.m., texting each other just to make sure the other was still there. Day 18. Couldn't sleep. I started Googling Ms. Brown and found this old Reddit thread from 2019. Who is your worst teacher? 3 different accounts mentioned her by name, talking about her mind games, how she'd pick one student each year to torment. The thread had been deleted, but the cached version was still on the Wayback Machine. I screenshotted everything and sent it to our lawyer. Day 19. The school board meeting turned into complete chaos. Parents screamed at each other. Half wanted Ms. Brown arrested. The other half thought she was being scapegoated. One woman yelled that Ms. Brown saved those kids by maintaining order. Ben's dad, even though they'd pulled out of the lawsuit, stood up and shouted back, "She nearly got them all killed." Security had to clear the room while people pushed and shoved in the parking lot. Rebecca Harris, Daniel's mom, filed for a restraining order the next morning. Ms. Brown's supporters started showing up at our houses, taking photos of our front doors, posting them online with our addresses. The judge said without direct threats, it was just free speech. Rebecca sat in the courtroom crying while the judge explained that taking pictures from public property wasn't illegal. That same night, I couldn't sleep. Scrolling through comments defending Ms. Brown, around 3 a.m., something inside me snapped. I grabbed my laptop, pulled up the audio recordings from that day that the news had released. The timeline was public record now. I synced up Ms. Brown's exact words with the gunshots. Setting up my phone against my desk lamp, I hit record and just started reading from the transcript. I didn't approve any lockdown drill today. Bang! Echoed from my laptop speakers. Sit down or you're all getting zeros. Bang! Bang! My hands were shaking, but I kept going. Every single thing she said while kids were dying down the hall. When I posted it to TikTok at 4:17 a.m., I didn't expect anything. By noon, it had 2 million views and climbing. Other kids from school started making their own videos, showing what their teachers did. Mrs. Garcia had everyone under desks in 8 seconds. Mr. Peterson had his whole class in the storage closet before the second announcement. Coach Williams literally carried 2 freshmen who froze into the equipment room. Every single teacher, except Ms. Brown, had their students hidden within 30 seconds. The hashtags exploded. #TeachersSaveStudents showed heroes, while #BrownChoseControl showed our classroom still sitting at desks while gunshots echoed. That night, around 2 a.m., Tyler showed up at my house without warning. His mom found him having a panic attack in his bathroom and drove him over. We sat in my driveway until the sun came up, sharing earbuds, listening to old playlists from before everything changed. He kept whispering the same thing, over and over, like a prayer. The district attorney's office called a press conference the next morning. 23 counts of reckless endangerment of a minor, 1 for each student in our class. Ms. Brown turned herself in, wearing a navy suit with all her teaching awards pinned to her jacket like medals. The cameras caught every second as she walked up those courthouse steps, chin high, a little smile on her face. Her bail hearing happened that afternoon. The judge set it at $50,000. Her supporters had a GoFundMe running before she was even processed. 2 hours and 17 minutes. That's all it took to raise the full amount. She walked out of that courthouse, still smiling, and stopped right in front of the cameras. Mom had to grab both my arms and physically drag me back to the car when Ms. Brown started talking about vindication and control. The victims' families started meeting at the community center on Wednesdays, but I couldn't make myself go. Mom went instead and came back with puffy eyes every single time. She'd just hold me extra tight and not say anything. Ben texted me a photo of something his mom found, Jake Wilson's junior year essay, with Ms. Brown's comments all over it in red pen. The essay looked fine to me, but her notes were brutal, lazy thinking, disappointing effort. At the bottom, in her perfect handwriting, a note about discussing his future in her course. Detective Santos called me the next day. 6 more complaints against Ms. Brown, going back 15 years, all from male students, all mentioning psychological manipulation. Every single complaint dropped after closed-door meetings. The detective sounded tired. Not unusual in cases like this, she said. Principal Foster resigned at an emergency press conference nobody expected. He stood at that podium and actually admitted he failed us. He said Ms. Brown should have been removed years ago, but he chose the easy path instead. Reporters seemed shocked that someone was taking responsibility for once. 2 days later, Ms. Brown's lawyer filed a countersuit against the school district for $5 million. They claimed the district was scapegoating her for their own security failures. My phone buzzed with the news alert while I was in my therapist's waiting room. I actually laughed out loud at the audacity. The next day, Rebecca called a meeting. All 23 families showed up. She stood at the front, stacks of papers, explaining we weren't just defending ourselves anymore. We were filing criminal complaints with the state board and launching a federal civil rights lawsuit. Parents were signing papers, exchanging phone numbers. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started writing everything down in an old notebook. Every word Ms. Brown said during those 47 minutes. How she blocked the light switch. How she threatened us with zeros and expulsion while gunshots got closer. Dr. Patel said writing helps process trauma, but it felt more like building a case. 3 days later, my phone blew up with notifications about a new website. A group of Ms. Brown's former students created Survivors of Room 203. I clicked the link. Testimonial after testimonial poured in. 37 stories in the first few days. Kids from 10 years ago describing the same tactics. Public humiliation when you questioned her. Grades mysteriously dropping if you challenged her authority. Mind games that made you doubt yourself. The pattern was right there for everyone to see. A local reporter reached out. My hands shook when the camera rolled, but I kept my voice steady. I told them exactly what happened. How she looked at us while gunshots echoed, and chose her authority over our lives. The segment aired that evening. My phone buzzed for hours. Ben surprised everyone the next day, posting his own story on Instagram despite his parents begging him not to. He wrote about almost staying seated because he was more afraid of Miss Brown's punishment than dying. He said I saved his life by defying her. Within 3 hours, his post had 10,000 shares. The FBI agent called my parents that afternoon. New information. Jake had texted a friend the night before the shooting about Ms. Brown destroying him. The friend had deleted the messages out of guilt, but investigators recovered them. Explicit about Jake's plans. His specific hatred for Ms. Brown. 2 days later, news broke. Ms. Brown's husband had filed for divorce and moved out in the middle of the night. Court documents showed he'd been planning it for months, but the shooting pushed up his timeline. Even her own husband was abandoning ship. I had to go back to school to get my stuff. The semester was ending. Room 203 was still sealed with crime scene tape. The hallway felt wrong, smelled like industrial cleaner trying to cover something else. I grabbed my things from my locker as fast as I could while Tyler waited in the parking lot, car running. The prosecution brought in Dr. Catherine Mills, a crisis response expert. She spent 3 days reviewing everything. Her conclusion was brutal. Ms. Brown violated every established protocol. Gross negligence that directly endangered our lives. Her report was 50 pages of professional language basically saying Ms. Brown chose control over children. Then Ms. Brown's supporters organized a rally at the courthouse. It turned into a disaster. Parents of the 2 students who died showed up as counter-protesters. When someone yelled Brown did nothing wrong, one of the mothers just collapsed, sobbing on the courthouse steps. The photo went viral. Our town, completely divided. Tyler's mom organized a support group meeting that weekend. All 23 of us survivors gathered in a circle of folding chairs. The girl from Mr. Peterson's class twisted her hair, talking about how their teacher immediately flipped desks to make a barrier. A kid from the science wing described his teacher pulling them into the chemical storage room, blocking the door with a filing cabinet. Everyone had the same story, except us. Their teachers protected them. Ours tried to get us killed. One girl just looked at me and said, "We shouldn't have had to save ourselves." Everyone nodded. The State Board of Education finally launched their investigation on day 35. Rebecca called me. They were subpoenaing 10 years of records. She said investigators found 17 formal complaints against Ms. Brown that were never properly documented. Criminal charges against the administrators who covered for her were now on the table. Mom arranged dinner with Tyler's family that night. We sat around their dining room table, pushing food around our plates. Tyler's dad kept trying to talk about college plans. His mom mentioned summer vacation, then stopped mid-sentence when a car backfired outside, and we all jumped. We were all pretending we weren't different now. That loud noises didn't make us freeze. That shadows didn't make our hearts race. On day 40, I found myself at the state capitol building. A microphone in front of me, 300 people in the audience. The legislative committee sat behind their long desk, taking notes. I read my prepared statement. I told them Ms. Brown weaponized her authority while a weapon was in our school. I said she chose her ego over our lives. I asked how many complaints it takes before someone acts. The representatives just stared at me. 2 days later, a custodian named Frank contacted our lawyer with something huge. Security footage from 3 years ago. Nobody knew it existed because it was from an old camera system they forgot to disconnect. The video showed Jake leaving Ms. Brown's classroom, tears streaming down his face, then punching a wall so hard his knuckles bled. The timestamp matched the day Jake filed his complaint. The original investigation never included this footage. Ben's family called us on day 42. They were rejoining the lawsuit. His dad's company mysteriously got all those contracts back the same day the FBI started investigating Ms. Brown's brother-in-law for witness tampering. His dad said some things are more important than money. But we all knew the truth. The brother-in-law backed down when federal agents showed up at his office. The grand jury met the next week. They upgraded Ms. Brown's charges to attempted murder through depraved indifference. Her lawyer went on the news, calling it prosecutorial overreach. But the DA held a press conference, explaining that keeping children exposed during an active shooter situation showed extreme disregard for human life. Legal experts on TV said this charge usually only applies to drunk driving deaths, but this case might set a new precedent. Tyler got his early admission letter to State University on day 45. He called them that afternoon to defer for a gap year. He came over that night and was sat on my porch while he explained he couldn't leave me to face the trial alone. We both knew what we had wasn't normal teenage stuff anymore. We were connected by something darker now, something that went beyond love into shared survival. Day 47 was my first good day since the shooting. I went 6 whole hours without thinking about it, helping Mom reorganize the garage. Then the guilt hit me like a truck. How could I forget, even for a minute, when 2 kids were dead? Dr. Patel said, healing isn't linear, but it felt like betrayal. Like I was abandoning the kids who didn't make it out. The state board held their hearing on day 50 to revoke Ms. Brown's teaching license. She showed up in a black suit, claiming this was a lynching of a dedicated educator. When they showed her testimonials from 37 former students describing her behavior, she called them weak children who couldn't handle high standards. Several board members visibly pulled back from their microphones. The woman running the hearing had to call for order twice when Ms. Brown started yelling about cancel culture. They voted unanimously to revoke her license permanently and referred the case to the Attorney General for additional charges related to child endangerment spanning her entire career. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and therapy sessions until Detective Santos called me on day 52. News that made my hands shake so bad I dropped my phone. She'd been digging through old personnel files when she found a sealed folder from 2009 about Ms. Brown's transfer from Westfield High. A student there had tried to kill herself and left a 3-page note naming Ms. Brown specifically for the daily humiliation and mind games that pushed her to that point. The school quietly moved Miss Brown to our district rather than investigate because the superintendent's wife was Ms. Brown's cousin. Within hours of Detective Santos leaking this to a reporter friend, my phone blew up with notifications from a Facebook group called Survivors of Patricia Brown. It already had 200 members. Former students from 3 different schools were sharing stories going back 25 years. Public shaming, contradictory instructions followed by punishment for confusion, gaslighting about things she'd said minutes earlier. One girl from 1998 wrote that Ms. Brown told her she was too stupid for college in front of the whole class, then denied it when her parents complained. Another kid from 2003 said Ms. Brown made him stand in front of the class while she listed everything wrong with his essay, including mocking his stutter. The pattern was always the same, always protected by administrators who found it easier to transfer her than deal with complaints. 2 days later, Mom drove me to meet the Johnsons and the Garcias, whose kids, Michael and Sophia, died in the shooting because they stayed at their desks, following Ms. Brown's orders. Mrs. Johnson held my hand, tears rolling down her face, and said she didn't blame any of us survivors. Mr. Garcia's voice cracked. We fought to save ourselves, he told me, while their children never got the chance because they followed the rules. We sat in their living room, crying together for an hour, looking at photos of Michael and Sophia at prom, just 3 weeks before they died. Rebecca called that afternoon with updates on the prosecution strategy. What she told me made me run to the bathroom to throw up. They had evidence Ms. Brown knew Jake was likely targeting her based on previous incidents where he'd confronted her after class. She deliberately kept us exposed as a form of psychological torture. The prosecutors were going to argue she used us as human shields for her ego, that she'd rather risk our lives than admit she was wrong about the lockdown. The truth was more horrifying than any of us imagined. She saw us as props in her power game, even with a shooter in the building. By day 56, the school district's lawyers were in full panic mode. They offered a $30 million settlement, divided among all the families, admitting no wrongdoing but acknowledging failures. Some families took it immediately. They couldn't afford years of legal battles. But my parents and 12 other families held out for criminal justice, not just money. Tyler picked me up 2 days later to visit the memorial that had grown outside the school. Hundreds of flowers, teddy bears, photos covering the front steps. Someone had left a copy of the student handbook with the lockdown procedures highlighted in yellow, a note attached. These rules save lives when teachers follow them. We stood there holding hands, reading all the messages, when Tyler spotted something that made him squeeze my finger so hard it hurt. Between two bouquets was a printed copy of Jake's manifesto. 5 pages detailing Ms. Brown's teaching methods like a psychological torture manual. He documented the public humiliation, the deliberately confusing instructions followed by punishment, the gaslighting. Example after example, with dates and witnesses. The FBI had verified every incident. That same week, Ms. Brown's former teaching assistant from 2015 finally broke her silence. She'd quit after 1 semester because she couldn't watch what Ms. Brown did to students anymore. Had even reported it to Principal Foster. But nothing was done because Ms. Brown had tenure, and the union would fight any disciplinary action. Another administrator who chose the easy path. Another adult who could have stopped this years ago. Ben's deposition happened on day 62. His parents sent me the transcript later, so proud of how strong he was. His voice never wavered when he said, "Miss Brown taught us that authority was more important than safety. But that day, I taught everyone that survival is the only thing that matters." The prosecutor asked if he blamed me for defying Ms. Brown. Ben said I was the only adult in that room who acted like one. That a 17-year-old girl showed more leadership than a woman with 25 years of teaching experience. The FBI showed up at Ms. Brown's brother-in-law's house the next morning with a warrant for witness tampering and obstruction of justice. They'd caught him on a wiretap threatening Ben's dad's business partners if Ben didn't change his testimony. Her whole support network was crumbling as people realized the lengths she'd gone to protect herself. Hiring private investigators, having her brother-in-law pressure anyone who might testify. 2 weeks later, I sat at our kitchen table with Rebecca, the prosecutor, spreading out pages of notes for my victim impact statement. She pushed a legal pad toward me and told me not to hold back. The jury needed to understand everything. Tyler sat next to me, his hand on my knee under the table, while I wrote about how she kept us at our desks while a shooter walked the halls. I wrote until my hand cramped, then typed, then wrote some more. The words came out angry at first, then sad, then just tired. Rebecca read through my draft and nodded. "This will help the jury see the truth," she said. 2 days later, the court clerk called. Trial set for 3 months out. 3 whole months of waiting. I tried going back to normal stuff like SAT prep and college applications. But how do you write about your future goals when you almost didn't have a future at all? The Common App essay prompt asked about a challenge I'd overcome. I just stayed at the blank page for hours. Then, on day 70, my phone blew up with texts from Ben. Ms. Brown had sent an email to his parents, saying their son was confused about what happened and suggesting they get him therapy to help him remember correctly. The prosecutor had her arrested within 2 hours. News vans showed up at her house, caught her being let out in handcuffs, yelling about being persecuted for maintaining order. The judge called an emergency hearing the next morning. I sat in the gallery watching as the prosecutor showed the email, explained how Ms. Brown had violated her bail conditions by contacting witnesses. The judge didn't even let her lawyer finish his argument before revoking her bail. Court officers moved toward her. She stood up fast, knocking over her water glass. For the first time since this all started, I saw real fear in her eyes as they cuffed her. She looked right at me as they led her past the gallery, and I could see it hit her. She wasn't in control anymore. 2 nights later, Mom found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., surrounded by college essay drafts. My Common App essay was about the day I chose to survive despite my teacher's orders. Mom read over my shoulder and said I didn't have to write about this if it was too hard. I told her I did, because this was who I was now. We both knew I'd never be the person I was before that day. The trial started 3 months later, on a cold Monday morning. The prosecutor's opening statement included playing the audio from my phone that I'd been recording for a class project. You could hear the shots getting closer, students crying, and Ms. Brown's voice, clear as day, saying we were being hysterical and manufacturing fear. Several jurors put their hands over their mouths. Ms. Brown sat at the defense table in a gray suit, still acting like she was the victim. The next day, I testified for 4 straight hours. The prosecutor walked me through every second of those 4 to 7 minutes, having me describe where everyone was sitting, what Ms. Brown said, how she blocked the light switch. Her lawyer tried to make me look like some rebellious kid who just didn't like authority. But I stayed calm. I just kept repeating the facts. When he asked why I defied a teacher's direct order, I looked at the jury and said, I chose to live, while she chose her ego. Nobody said anything for like 10 seconds. On day 3, Tyler took the stand. He talked about getting my texts, about hiding in that supply closet, knowing I was in danger. His voice cracked when he described the moment he thought I was dead because I stopped responding. Ms. Brown's lawyer objected, calling it emotional manipulation. But the judge said the jury needed to understand the trauma she caused by keeping students exposed. Tyler had to take 3 breaks to compose himself. Day 4 changed everything. The prosecution had enhanced the security footage audio using some FBI tech. You could hear stuff we couldn't make out before. At timestamp 9:47 a.m., right after the first shots, Ms. Brown's voice came through crystal clear, saying, if this is real, they deserve what they get for not respecting me. A juror actually gasped out loud. Even her own lawyer looked shocked. This wasn't in any of the discovery materials. The judge had to call a recess when parents in the gallery started yelling. Day 5. Ms. Brown decided to testify against her lawyer's advice. She sat in the witness box, insisting she maintained perfect order, that we were never in real danger, that she was being persecuted for having standards. She said she was protecting us from panic, and that running around would have been more dangerous. The prosecutor let her talk for 20 minutes, then asked one question that made the whole courtroom go silent. Did you recognize Jake Wilson's voice when he was in the hallway outside your classroom? Ms. Brown froze completely, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. After maybe 15 seconds, she whispered, yes. The courtroom exploded, people shouting, crying. The judge had to bang his gavel over and over. The prosecutor stood up slowly after things got quiet again, walked right up to Ms. Brown's face. She asked the question everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to hear out loud. Did Ms. Brown know it was Jake Wilson in that hallway? The same Jake Wilson who filed 3 complaints against her last year. Ms. Brown's hand started shaking. Her face went from red to white to gray in about 5 seconds. The whole courtroom held its breath. Finally, she cracked. She started yelling about how Jake needed to learn respect, just like all of us did. The jury members looked at each other, mouths open. One lady in the back row started crying. 3 weeks later, we all came back for verdict day. You could feel the tension like electricity. The jury took 6 hours to decide. But when they came back, they found her guilty on everything. 23 counts of putting kids in danger, plus something called depraved indifference that sounded even worse. Ms. Brown fell down in her chair. For the first time, she looked scared instead of angry. The judge said she could get up to 25 years. The families of the 3 kids who died started sobbing. 2 weeks after that, I had to read my victim impact statement at sentencing. My hands were sweating so bad I could barely hold the paper, but I made myself look at her while I talked. I told her she taught me that being in charge without being smart about it was dangerous, that trying to control people without caring about them was just being mean. I said I'd carry those 47 minutes with me forever, but she'd have to carry what she chose to do. The judge gave her 18 years, with a chance for parole after 12. When the guards put the handcuffs on her, she turned to all of us and said she was just keeping standards. Even then, she didn't get it, and that was maybe the worst part of all. A month later, Tyler and I sat in his car, watching workers put in new metal detectors and cameras at school. We were different now, stuck together by what happened, but also just different inside. Tyler took my hand. We survived, he said. And this time, it wasn't a question. Ben went to the school board meeting that spring. He gave this amazing speech about fixing how they handled teacher complaints. His voice was strong and clear. Nothing like the scared kid who almost stayed in his seat that day. He said, no student should have to pick between their grades and staying alive. I started at State University that fall, studying education policy. Because somebody needs to fix this stuff. My roommate didn't know what happened. And for a few weeks, I was just Brianna, instead of the shooting girl. It felt good, but also weird, keeping that huge thing inside me. They reopened room 203 as a memorial classroom in November and asked me to speak at the ceremony. Standing where Ms. Brown used to stand felt so strange. But I told everyone that protecting kids isn't just about locks and drills. It's about listening when they say something's wrong. Mom drove me home for winter break. We passed the school where kids were playing basketball, like nothing ever happened there. I told her they looked so young. She said we all did back then. We both knew I'd never be that young again, because innocence was another thing that died that day. Tyler and I met at our old coffee shop when we were both home from college for the holidays. We still checked where the exits were. We still jumped when someone dropped a tray, but we were learning to live with it. Tyler held my hand and said we were writing new chapters now, which sounded cheesy, but also true. The scars would always be there, but we were more than what happened in room 203. We were the kids who refused to stay in our seats when standing up meant staying alive. Honestly, I still think about that moment when I had to choose between a teacher's rules and my own life. What would you have done? Would you have stayed in your seat? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.